All right, good evening, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. We're 15 past here. I want to, first of all, just welcome you to the Denver Citizen Oversight Board Public Forum. My name is Katina Banks. I'm currently the chair of the Oversight Board. This evening, we're going to be hearing from our police chief. He's been recently appointed, I should say, by the mayor. But first, I want to share a little bit about the Oversight Board. And I'm going to begin by introducing the other board members. To my right, your left, we have Cisco Gallarda, and then Nikki Brazil, Mark Brown, excuse me, Molly Gallegos, and Dr. Mary Davis, and then, of course, our guest speaker, Chief Pazen, is here with us. Thank you again, Chief, for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing from you. With that said, I want to share a little bit about the Citizens Oversight Board. For those of you that don't know, the ordinance that created the Citizen Oversight Board, as well as the Office of the Independent Monitor, basically fixed three responsibilities for this board. Number one is to assess the effectiveness of the Independent Monitor. Two is to issue policy recommendations concerning discipline, rules, hiring, training, with regard to personnel in the Denver Police Department, the Sheriff's Department, and actually some members of the Denver Fire Department. And then finally, we're tasked with basically addressing issues of concern with the community. We also want to make sure that we're aware of the complaint process and that we sometimes make recommendations with regard to specific cases that are reflected in those complaints. Now it's important, I think, for me to share with you that this board does not have any command responsibilities with respect to the law enforcement departments or personnel. We basically exercise our advisory duties through a series of meetings and consultations, both with the monitor as well as with members of the safety department. And that generally entails quarterly meetings with the director of safety, the police chief, and the sheriff. We also meet regularly with the monitor, and as needed, we sometimes meet with other law enforcement personnel. So it's through these meetings that we can monitor confidential internal investigations. We also keep informed on current policies, and we make suggestions and give feedback, to law enforcement leaders. I want to share with you, because I think it's important that the community be aware of this board and be aware of the issues that we're seeing each time that we meet the first and third Friday of every month. Those meetings are held at the Independent Monitor's office, which is in the first floor of the Denver Post building. Those meetings are open to the public with the exception of executive sessions where we talk about ongoing investigations. And finally, under the ordinance, we're required to hold meetings in the community like this one we're having tonight. And so it's through that we endeavor to hold these forums in different locations to try to engage as many community members as we possibly can. With that said, now that you know a little bit more about the board, again, the idea of these meetings is to basically cover some issue relating to criminal justice, to the criminal justice system, and or the oversight system. And tonight, we are fortunate to have Police Chief Paul Pazen, and he's going to speak with us about two things, really. We asked him to share with the community about the new use of force policy that was adopted by the Denver Police Department. In addition, because he's newly appointed, to talk to us a little bit about his vision for policing here in Denver. And so with that, I would like to turn it over to Chief Pazen.
All right. Thank you very much, Katina. Hello, my name is Paul Pazen, and I have the great pleasure of being the police chief for the city and county of Denver. And this truly is an opportunity that we do not want to waste. As somebody that grew up to a single mom here in North Denver, you're on my turf, I'm a Northsider, that this is truly an opportunity for us to give back. And I would like to also introduce our team. Nearest me is Division Chief of Patrol, Ron Thomas. And then standing next to Division Chief Thomas is Deputy Chief Barb Archer. So thanks for being here. We truly have a very talented team. It's also very Denver-centric, and not that's extra icing on top of the cake. These are the right individuals for the right positions. Both of these folks have extensive backgrounds in the areas of their responsibility, and they're tremendous leaders, so I'm super proud of our team. But like me, they grew up in this city. They went to Denver high schools, and they still choose to live in this city. So when we're talking about connections to our community, that's what we're all about. I'll get started on the use of force policy. It's very timely that today was actually the very first training session that we had. As many of you may know that have participated in this process, that we were training the officers that work in the downtown district, Central Business District, Police District 6. They received the training today, so 8 hours worth of training. We'll get into that in a second. I was planning on standing up, but we'll see if this works. So, and we also are very fortunate that we have several members from the Citizen Committee that helped to develop this use of force policy. And their input is really what helped us come up with essentially the final product, a very strong and progressive policy that we as a city can stand behind and be proud of. So I would absolutely love to acknowledge Wes, who's over here, Rashawn, I see in the back, Elizabeth, thank you very much. Is there any other committee members that participated in this use of force? Okay, 3's pretty good, right? So basically, this was 19 months worth of work. Chief White recognized that this policy needed to get looked at. There was an initial review, internal. We at some point recognized that we were doing this in maybe not the most transparent process possible, and fortunately we were able to get community members to start looking at this and being partners in this review. Several meetings, regular meetings on this process, and ultimately the two sides came together and formed this policy. Whoa, pushing fast. Ultimately, the goals of the policy are to increase accountability for our department and the officers that work within the department, and really to raise the standard. So these are Chief White's terms, and they're very appropriate. When the chief talks about just because you can do something legally, it doesn't mean that it's the right thing to do. So raising that standard above what the legal standard is. Graham versus Connor is the case law that has settled this in the past, is holding the department and the officers to a higher standard is much better. And really what you see in the purpose statement within the policy and throughout the policy is consistent references to de-escalating. We want to de-escalate situations in order to limit or avoid the use of force in the first place. Everything all right?
Thanks, Gia.
Great. So we talked about the Community Committee, the Denver Justice Project, who's represented here today. ACLU participated. The Ministerial Alliance was a part of this. Together Colorado. Wes, thank you very much. Colorado Latino Forum. City Council played a big part in this as well. We have to give credit to the council members that really stuck with this. They did a tremendous job and deserve a lot of credit for this as well. So we list here our planning section. That's because there were many edits and drafts, and we had all kinds of different colors in here of what made sense and what didn't make sense, and red, green, black, all kinds of different text and fonts trying to come to the final policy. They worked pretty hard. Our training division had some input, as well as our labor organizations. They may have left the table a little bit early on in the process, but they absolutely were involved in it. And then we'll talk about this a little bit more towards the end when we're getting into the meat of the policy. But our new leadership team and the senior command staff, we put a fresh set of eyes on this policy, and I'm really proud of the input that they had for this as well. Real quickly, this is just a snapshot in time. It's based out of 2016, Denver's policy with regards to many of the categories that you're looking for in a use of force policy. We meet many of those categories. That's a comparison to other cities throughout the country. The green line is kind of the consensus policy. That's what International Association of Chiefs of Police recommend, and you can see we have higher standards than even what they're pushing. And again, this is due to the input that community members have, as well as the input that our senior command staff had towards the end. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And I'm blasting through this. I promise we'll have plenty of time for questions moving forward. When we talk about common themes, it's the de-escalation that you see throughout this, as well as utilizing the decision-making model. We want to make sure that even in the situations that are rapidly unfolding, that our officers are comfortable and that they're utilizing sound decision making, and that's why the model is a big part of this policy. We want to make sure that those decisions are taking into as many factors as possible. Obviously, when you have a lot of time, discretionary time to make decisions, those should be extremely sound. We want to make sure that our officers are utilizing and very familiar with the decision-making model that is directly aligned with our mission, vision, and values as a department. So it's real important to note that, again, that 19 months worth of work and having community input, that listening to the community is important. It's not just checking the box and saying that we're doing it. You can see that over 100 committee recommendations were adopted, and I'll give you a couple of examples of that. So when you're talking about the purpose of this entire policy, committee language is listed there in the white font, and the gray font is the gray text is the DPD language. So you can see how they merge together, that the committee really had a big say in this entire policy. Reasonable and necessary. So Wes, Elizabeth, this was something that really the committee was all about. They had it right from the get-go. This was something, as we came in late, that we adopted. I'll give the committee credit. Reasonable and necessary is where we ended up. We had a couple of cutesy words in there that made it difficult to understand and even more difficult to train. And if something's difficult to train, as important as the use of force policy, then I think we're going to have some challenges on down the road. So I like the language that the committee came up with as we implement this policy, as we move forward training this policy. This is the type of language that you want, very clear language, very understandable language, and kudos to the committee because they got it right, and that's what we implemented. This was a big source of contention, particularly late in the process. Many of the committee members really were adamant about this as far as being able to talk about the amount of force. This was where we came in and really took a fresh set of eyes on this. I really like where we ended up on this particular policy. When we were talking about using type as the definition, it was, again, a little bit convoluted. It was hard to explain, really didn't get to the meat of what we're talking about, and switching this or listening, right, taking the recommendations and being inclusive of those thoughts, we ended up with amount, and again, I am very proud of the final product that we are at. So I guess let me just go back and throw more kudos to the committee because that's where we are on this. So you heard me talk about the team that we have. We have a very diverse team, executive command staff, but more importantly, it's a very inclusive team, meaning when we were going through this process, we took, again, a completely fresh set of eyes on this. We looked at the committee recommendations. We looked at the proposed use of force policy. We dug up some of the other policies from across the country and looked at it. Here is something that I want to point out that our team came up with themselves or came up on their own, and that's, again, holding ourselves to a higher standard. So, and this wasn't something that we went back to the committee and said, hey, we got these cool little things that we want to add. What are you willing to trade off for it? Our team put them in place because they were the right things to do. So there is in addition to the RIP restraint, making sure that is done appropriately with the training, implementing that into the policy makes this a stronger policy, as well as when the ultimate use of force is utilized, the discharge of a firearm, that officers will not be allowed to review body cam footage of that prior to making their statements. Again, this was our senior command staff that came up with this. This is the benefit of having two members that were previous commanders of internal affairs, as well as two members that were previous commanders of the major crimes division, the two parts of the department that interact most with the use of force policy. So again, very happy with the end result, and I'm also happy that we took the time. I'll be perfectly honest. We could have hit the easy button both with the policy itself as well as with the training, and instead of doing that, we did what was right. So we could have said the July 5th meeting that many folks or that the committee members were presented with what was the final use of force policy, and said, no, that was the final, and that's what we're going with. However, we did take the time, several weeks, to review the policy, to listen to the recommendations, and make appropriate changes as a result of that. And then we could have taken the easy way out and hit the easy button with regard regards to the implementation of this. We already have a system in place. Basically, it's a fancy email system that you push out documents to all of the officers, and we can track whether people have read it. There's a little sign off, and really it's for CYA. We didn't do that either. We're taking the hard road with regards to both the policy itself, and I'm happy it's a policy that we can all stand behind, and then we're doing the exact same thing with the training of this. So we'll talk about that here in a second. Training. So with all of the work that went on this, the 19 months, the contentious meetings, the breakthroughs, all of that took place, it was very important that we implement the training and implement the policy as quickly as possible. In order to do it right, we want to make sure that our officers have comprehensive training. And what we came up with is that all officers, with today being the first day that the training was rolled out, will receive 8 hours of training on the policy itself. Our supervisors, the street supervisors, the sergeants, will receive an additional 4 hours of training, because we have to make sure that we're documenting any and all of the use of force incidences appropriately. So supervisors get additional 4 hours worth of training. And as we discussed briefly, it's a phased approach. We are starting with District 6. We have this very comprehensive schedule. We have, when we're training officers from District 6, there's still 911 calls that come in, so we have to do this staggered approach. But it's very ambitious for us to attempt to get everybody trained by the end of the year, but the schedule that we have in place gets us there. So I'm real happy with the Training Bureau and the amount of effort that they've already put into this, as well as our supervisory team that has put the schedule together for it. So that's where we are in 2018, and we're very intentional on putting that, because 2019 we have additional training or some follow-up training to really ensure that we reinforce the training that has taken place. I would have loved to have started this type of training in 2018. However, the technology doesn't exist as far as creating your own scenarios right now. So we do have a couple of folks that have gone through the Virtua 300. This is almost a 360. That's why they call it 300. But we are creating our own scenarios based on use of force incidences, based on litigated cases, so we can ensure that officers go through this process in a reality-based simulator, in virtual reality simulator. We will train out the gray areas of the policy, that they will know exactly what it is that is expected of them when they're out on the street at 3 o'clock in the morning in random District X. So very excited about this. This is something that we are working towards. It takes several months to build out the scenarios. You have to video them, and there's a bunch of if-then type. And I know we have some folks that have gone through the simulator, and they can kind of explain how this is great training in its current form. This is the first of I've heard anybody attempting to do this based on use of force, based on a use of force policy. So that's what we're doing in 2019. It should really help us quite a bit as we reinforce and cement the type of training that we need with regards to this critical policy. And that's it. We got to end with a cool DPD badge, right? That's fancy graphics for us. Questions on use of force?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chief Pazen. I think initially I want to ask the board if they have any questions, and then we'll open it up to the public. Thank you for the presentation. Does anyone from the board have any questions for the chief regarding anything that he mentioned?
Well, since you ended talking about Virtua and training, can you tell us how many hours each officer will go through on the Virtua machine?
So Our training in 2018 is 8 hours, and then that reinforced training in 19 is going to be 16 hours.
Okay, and how many of those hours in 2019 will be on the VirTra simulator?
Yeah, so it's segmented. You can tell how those sessions themselves, based on how the officers perform through that, they could be very extended or it could be a little bit short. So we're doing, lecture-based. It's an interaction of both.
Okay, but will every officer get, say, a minimum of the situation-based play, like a minimum of an hour?
We're going to have a
or-
minimum of scenarios, a minimum number of scenarios.
Okay, and that
we're
hasn't been
creating-
determined
right,
yet?
We're creating those scenarios based on previous incidences of use of force that maybe we could have improved on prior to.
Okay, and so when we visited and went through the VirTra simulation process, there was a discussion with the trainer afterwards about the choices we made at various points. Is that a standard part of that training?
That's exactly what we're talking about. We're utilizing that technology to enhance the learning, adult-based learning, situational-based learning. So that's why we're pushing towards this goal. And I think, as somebody outside the police department that's gone through that process, that's exactly what we're talking about. And maybe you can speak to whether or not you think that that's advantageous to use that type of training moving forward.
I certainly appreciated the stop and discuss portion of that
Yes.
training.
Great.
Yeah.
For context for the community, just so you know, the board members who were able to go recently did a half-day going through various aspects of the Department of Safety's program. So we went and we visited the downtown detention facility. We also went to the police academy, and there we got to see a bit of the CIT training as well as experience the VirTra visual simulator in a very active shooter type scenario. It was very informative. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I have a question here. So this some police departments, huh?
Use your mic, please.
Oh, sorry. So some people in other departments, the officers, when they point a gun at someone, regardless if they use it or not, they write reports about it.
Right.
And what would cause them to unholster their weapon, and even if it's a short one, do the Denver Police Department do? Is that a standard procedure, and did that change?
So the procedure or policy did not change with regards to that. We did take a fresh look at that specific policy. We grabbed sample policies from all over the country. Some do, some don't. And I get the answer to that is no. We do not require a use of force report anytime somebody unholsters their weapon. And we did deliberate and discuss this quite extensively.
Was it because it was too time consuming?
Again, we looked, again, these are 19 months worth of conversations that really have taken place, as well as hours upon hours of things that we looked at. So there's not like a one reason over another. It's essentially even some of the verbiage that you'll see in here, the totality of the circumstances. So it is something that we did look at. It is not part of the final policy.
Okay, thank you.
Chief, you spoke about the input that you got in this policy, and knowing that you were making some changes, you have a fresh look at some things. I want to know what your plans would be to include the community, the OIM, the COB in future policy changes that might come about.
Great question, and I'm so glad that you asked, right? And then I think the committee members, we talked about this when we presented, what day was that? That had to have been July 20, was it July, early August? I don't know when it was. We did talk about this because this use of force policy is essentially a living document, right? We need to see what's working and what's not working, and we made a commitment to the committee that we would circle back in a year when we have some data to show what are the strengths of the policy and what, if any, are the weaknesses of the policy, and to come together and try to figure out different areas. And I mean, I guess there are plenty of items that were looked at, discussed, deliberated, that may in the future become part of the policy, or we just need more time to see what it looks like after we train it, after we implement it, and after it's in use.
And so that's related to this policy. Just thinking, moving forward, other policies that you may think about or you may consider making changes, the involvement of the Office of Independent Monitor, the Citizen Oversight Board, other
Right.
community members. What is your philosophy about that?
So the philosophy is that community-led projects are always better than projects that we try to figure out on our own. And I wish Nick was here, because he actually had some input as we were trying to put this over the finish line as well. So that is our philosophy, getting community input moving forward on things that we do. There are critical policies that we have, and there's I can't think of one that's more critical than the use of force policy, but there's other policies that are pretty mundane. The uniform policy that we have that might not necessarily need community input on something like that, but for the higher level, or the critical ones, chase policy, use of force policy, EO policy, those higher level ones, then absolutely.
And so you were mentioning, Nick, the OIM piece. The Citizen Oversight Board is accountable to the community. We're established in statute as having the responsibility for making recommendations related to policy and some other things. And so I would just want to emphasize our role, our potential role in changes that you may contemplate.
Thank you very much.
So speaking of the community, the community, I'm sure, has expressed a pretty strong belief in de-escalation tactics. And so I'm just curious, how does the use of force policy address de-escalation?
And did you get a copy of the policy yet, by chance?
I think so.
Okay. And I know I saw a couple of copies floating around. De-escalation is clearly stated in the purpose, and then it's repeated over and over again. De-escalation is the first goal that we're trying to accomplish here. I can tell you that the women and men that make up this department, that they're not out there going on the street looking for a fight, looking to mix it up, or looking to get into any kind of physical confrontation. We define that in policy, and we emphasize de-escalation. That's part of that decision-making model as well. So it's a very strong progressive policy that really highlights the need to de-escalate when practical. So you'll see other key phrases. The totality of the circumstances may dictate something else.
And how will you evaluate the new policy's effectiveness at de-escalation?
So, and then I guess this is an area that why we need a year's worth of study on this. We need the policy trained, we need it implemented, and then we need to see how it works. But the training, and then of course Wes leaves right at this critical point, right? Because Wes is the one talking about that data collection with regards to tracking this. We're currently, the OIM's report, semi-annual and annual report, tracks this. In the Internal Affairs Bureau tracks the numbers of complaints, the use of force incidences that we have, and that's how we will collect and find out if the policy's working or the policy's not working. So both in number and uses of force, as well as the outcomes of those as well.
Just for clarification, Chief, it sounded like you said that you were going to rely on the OIM's tracking of
no,
the
no.
use of force events?
I'm saying that that's another tracking mechanism that already exists. We have an internal system that does that. That annual report also tracks use of force, the incidences as well.
Okay, so some jurisdictions have made commitments to transparency regarding use of force incidents. Is there any plans for DPD
We
to?
are, look, that's why I was pointing to Wes, who left very untimely, as we said, because he shared with me, we've looked at other cities and how they do it, New York, Seattle's, Los Angeles. Wes actually has something that seems very streamlined and would work quite well. So we're looking at that right now.
Do you have a goal for what year that might kick in?
I don't. We're
Okay.
we're looking at it, and I mean, to the point that you say, this is something that is very transparent, and we can talk about it more with regards to the vision for DPD. Our stated goals, our vision that we're talking about, we want fewer discipline cases in the first place, and we're reaching across the table with labor groups with a stated goal of reducing the total number of incidences that we have. So instead of arguing about how severe a particular discipline case would be with one of the unions, it's so much better if we can work together to try to reduce the number of discipline cases in the first place. And when we're talking about prevention, we're not talking about only with regards to crime. We're talking about even discipline cases, use of force, all of those types of incidences. So, Wes, do you have something in hand for me? We talk about you and then you leave. Okay.
All the other members have. So.
Okay. All right. That's not the chart that we were looking at, but we're good.
So Chief, just want to ask a couple clarifying questions based on what you just said. When you talk about de-escalation, can you put some context in that for us? I mean, the word is used, I think we have a sense of it, but can you give us an example of sort of specifically how we would know that this policy is actually creating a situation where the circumstances were de-escalated?
So, and there's a couple of things that you can look at in the policy itself, right? You can see this fancy little chart that we have with arrows going up and arrows going down and cool blue and bright red.
Right.
So essentially, and then.
And I think that looks nice. I guess
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful for us to hear, just an example so we can really know how it might work in real life.
So essentially, oftentimes officers are called, 911 is dialed because somebody is in crisis, right? Somebody's having a bad day. And the people that are out there to respond are the Denver Police Department, the police officers. And they're oftentimes dealing with people when they happen to be at their worst. They may have a lot of stressors that have triggered them having a very bad day. There could be mental health, substance abuse, plenty of the drivers that can lead to individuals being in crisis or having a bad day. The de-escalation is, instead of meeting force with force or meeting agitation with agitation, confrontation with confrontation, you're trying to step that down, and you're trying to do that in a non-physical way. You're trying to do that using your words instead of your hands. That same stuff that we learn in kindergarten, right? Use your words. Use your nice words.
Thank you. And then another question I had, again, a clarifying point, is I think I heard you say that the way that you're wanting to try to evaluate whether the policy changes are effective is by looking at the data that you're going to be collecting around types of force, amount of force. Am I correct?
You're correct.
And so I think the only question I have, it's really akin to what Mary was asking, is to what extent do you anticipate, or do you think you will, involve, the OIM or the COB or the community in the evaluation process, or at least developing that evaluation process?
So, and then kind of back to my same answer, the OIM is involved in every single one of these, the annual report, the semi-annual report. They're already involved on all of our complaints, right?
Yes, but
Okay.
I'm talking about actual evaluation of a policy.
Right.
Right.
We need to train the policy, we need to implement the policy, and then we need to see if the policy is working. And I'm not ready to say that we have figured that part of it out.
Of course.
So we did say newly appointed chief early on. Right?
Absolutely,
It's
absolutely.
been a couple of weeks. Can you give me,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
little bit? I'm
We're
telling
gonna-
you that we're looking at different things. I'm super proud of where
Yeah.
we are. We're not to that stage yet, but it is
Sure.
absolutely on the radar.
Thank you. I think it's just transparency about the commitment to including the community that I wanted to know. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Anyone else have questions? Okay, well then, I think at this point, we'd like to open it up to the public. Is there something else? Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Let us take a step back. Chief, you were also going to speak about your vision for...
Yes.
So I'd like to do that, actually, before we just have open questions from the community.
Okay, are you sure? Use of force is pretty specific.
Use of force
I
is
start getting on
specific,
vision.
but-
We're
but we're all
going on
here.
a path with me. Okay,
We're all here.
We're
I don't
going.
think
Okay.
anyone... Thank you, though.
All right, great. Thank you for allowing us this opportunity as well, because I'm very excited about the future of the Denver Police Department and how it is going to help this city moving forward. We need to give credit where credit is due, and the foundation that the Denver Police Department is built on the legacy that Chief White has left us. We can't forget where we were 7 years ago prior to Chief White coming to the Denver Police Department. And he had a lot of great changes that have helped and benefited us. It would be a shame for us to throw all of that out and start over. And that's not what we're doing. We're not going backwards. We're going to learn from the mistakes that we've made over the past, and we're going to improve upon those. Our foundation is built on preventing crime and treating people with respect and dignity. That's what Chief White talked about and really had created our mission here in the Denver Police Department. And those are some areas of strength that we have, and we want to build on and improve those. Now, we're going to continue to work hard. We're going to continue to come up with innovative strategies to prevent crime from occurring in the first place. And we're going to continue and try to do even better with treating people with respect and dignity. However, our future is about reaching and stretching. And what we're going to do moving forward is focus on reducing social harms. Now, social harms are the fear of crime, mental health, substance abuse, and we have to do something about multimodal, right? Dr. Davis was talking about how long it took coming over here. This is the same street grid that we've had for decades, and we have a lot more people that live in our community, as well as a lot of folks that come in to Denver to work during the day and leave, and then people that come in at night to be entertained and leave, on top of the 700,000 residents that live here. So we have to do something more with regards to multimodal. We talk about crime and crime strategies, and we have some very effective incidences or very effective models that have proven effective for us. However, we have to address the fear of crime as well, because if you do not feel safe going to the library across the street, going to a business district, then it doesn't matter if the crime arrow is pointing down or the crime arrow is pointing up. You are still harmed, and you still are not living life to its fullest because you're locked into your house, or you're afraid to go out and enjoy a park or to, go to schools or whatever it is. So we have to do something about the fear of crime. We also have to look at many of the whys that crime occurs, and sometimes the drivers of crime involve issues with regards to mental health and substance abuse, and that's what we're talking about, reaching and stretching, building on and establishing new partnerships with traditional and non-traditional, both governmental and non-governmental agencies to address these types of challenges that often are the underlying cause and drivers of crime. So over the years, we've been doing pretty good at addressing the what, crime being the what. You see the fancy maps that we create with red dots and blue dots and circles and indicating what crime type, and then we have plenty of charts and data that says what crime type is going up and what crime type is going down, and we look at this in 7-day, 28-day, 52-week, year-to-date averages. We compare years over years, and we look for patterns and trends to try to address it. That's the what. We need to look at the why, and the whys are the social harms. That's what we're doing moving forward. We're going to take a deeper dive in order to help us address these types of issues. The how that we're going to do it is through precision policing. And precision policing, I'll give you a couple of examples. Essentially, there are 78 neighborhoods in Denver, and all 78 of the neighborhoods are very unique. You're in the West Colfax neighborhood right now, and West Colfax is very different than Villa Park, just to our south. We need to make sure that we're meeting those needs, the social harms that impact this neighborhood compared to a different neighborhood. So I often talk about Sun Valley because Sun Valley is a neighborhood that's near and dear to my heart. Sun Valley is the poorest neighborhood in the state of Colorado and the only neighborhood in Denver that has more young people than adults. They also have the highest levels of mental health challenges, both with adults and young people. Now, their social harm is obvious, mental health challenges. Another neighborhood that I think many of us know about, and that would be the Cherry Creek neighborhood. The Cherry Creek neighborhood has a different set of challenges. Fear of crime may be the social harm. You have people that may be afraid of being accosted when they're out shopping. The precision policing is making sure that we are meeting the needs of both communities, and we're not over-policing in Sun Valley by taking the cops out of the Cherry Creek neighborhood and providing extra officers in this area, and it's not taking the cops out of Sun Valley and putting them in a affluent neighborhood. It's about partnering and collaborating with traditional and non-traditional groups in order to do this. So in Sun Valley, for example, you would have nonprofits that deliver mental health services, and we have done this, where they've reached out to 142 families inside the home, delivering direct mental health services to folks in need. That's a partnership that we've developed and that we move forward. That's precision policing. In Cherry Creek, it would be some of the more traditional types of partnerships with business associations, the RNOs, in order to address the fear of crimes. It could be some force multipliers in that particular neighborhood in order to reduce the fear. So that's the how that we're going to do it. And then we have several large-scale programs that we want to implement. First on that list is a domestic violence-focused deterrence model. This city does an outstanding job of wrapping its arms around our victims of domestic violence, and that needs to continue, and it will continue. An area where we can improve is on the offender side of things, and we can do this in a proactive way in an effort to reduce the total number of domestic violence incidents. This is a model that has been proven effective out of North Carolina. The University of North Carolina independent evaluation of this process showing tremendous results. If we, even with a very conservative estimate, if we're able to get this off the ground and launch this 10% reduction, which is a conservative number, would be 241 fewer incidences, 241 fewer victims of domestic violence. So we're working very hard towards this. We're working with our city agency partners, the DA's office, but again, also nonprofits and non-traditional partners to help us in a proactive way address the other component, the other side of the equation in order to reduce the numbers of victims in this case. So very important. And then one of our, and I don't mind saying this, but something that's very important moving forward is that we put in our strategic plan that we are taking care of the people that take care of the people. We need to do a better job of making sure that our officers that are implementing these policies, that their wellness is being accounted for, and that we don't have officers that are out on the street having their worst day or their bad day when they're interacting with our community. And if we are doing this in a more comprehensive approach as well, then I think we'll be more effective as we implement this policy as well as those short-term and long-term strategies. And I have a longer-term strategy that's only going to revolutionize law enforcement altogether, but we'll save that for the next COB, okay? And that's where we're going.
Chief, I've got one question. My 50-year-old son, there was the most recent shooting. The officer shot the black youth in the back. I'm sorry?
Can't hear.
Okay. And I asked him, if he didn't commit a crime, why are you running? But his response to me is that he was afraid of the police officers. And so I've been in law enforcement for 30 years, and I'm trying to figure out a way how to relay his fears about the officers. I've always told them, go to the officer, they're going to help you out. And I think Commander Thomas was at a group. Weren't you there at the Young Black Men? I think you were speaking at that conference a couple months ago. And they did a great job just talking to these young black men on how to deal with police officers. I always tell them, if you get pulled over, put your hands on the wheels, ask for permission, do all the things you're supposed to do. But he's still afraid. So what can you do to go back into the community to talk to these young men of color to say, it's okay. How are you going to bridge that issue? I'm just curious.
So, how much time do we have? Well, a couple of things, right? And let me just lean on the policy. I mean, we're putting it in print that we want to de-escalate. Now, you know the Office of Independent Monitor very well, right?
Yes.
There we go. Bridging the Gap Kids and Cops program. Have you heard of that program?
Yes.
Okay. Well, so those that haven't heard of the program, I'll give the real Reader's Digest version. In 2013, right, Gia? Nick Mitchell and the office noticed an increase of low-level interactions that turned into high-level uses of force or complaints. That's not good. So, I mean, essentially, kind of broadening that topic, right? A low-level contact, an officer interacting with a young person of color, those should go pretty smooth. Just stopping, saying hi, seeing what's going on. There was too many of these cases that are escalating to use of force and very negative complaints. So to Nick's credit, identified this, and we could say that the OIM is more on this side of the spectrum, and the Denver Police Department is more on this side of the spectrum, right? OIM has oversight over the police department. But this is too important of an issue for us to stay in our own silos or stay on the opposite sides of the spectrum. So, one of the founders of this program is also in the back of the room. But this is how we're doing that outreach, is creating that program, and that the initial steps to that were here in Northwest Denver. Denver. I'm a very strong supporter of that program because essentially we're having those conversations in small groups, youth and adult facilitated, to break down those barriers, to bridge the gap between kids and cops. So as somebody that was on board since 2013 and went to all of the funding meetings to try to get it, the technical assistance to create it, and somebody that continues to push it, we are now being evaluated by the University of Colorado at Denver and seeing great results of this. So that's just a snapshot of an incredible program that we can all as a city be very proud of. But my stance and my philosophy is what you're talking about. We want to expand, grow, and do more, get better as we move forward. And this is one example where we are having those types of results, but it also speaks to that track record. This is not something new. We're not new to this game saying, okay, we have the answers. We don't. This is a partnership and a collaboration with OIM and nonprofits. We have Lyric, Learn Your Rights in Colorado, teaching know your rights, know your responsibilities. It's a collaborative effort. We can't do this job all by ourselves. We need every single person in this room, even with folks that are opposite sides of the spectrum, that see things through different sides or different prisms. That's how we get all of this done. And I'm here to tell you that we don't think that we have all the answers, and we're going to, push our vision forward and say, this is it. So kind of got me on my soapbox there for a second. I'll step down here in a minute. So.
Any other questions from the board?
Well, I do have one question regarding, it came to my attention, well, I work with a lot of youth in schools, and, they have different interactions with the police. And it seems to me that the Denver Police Department, there was a thing with SROs in schools. And so they removed some of the SROs and tried to reduce the tickets, which people refer to as the school to jail pipeline. Mm-hmm. But now it feels like the DPS security has picked up some of the interactions with youth. And my concern with that is, and then they refer out to the DPD. So so one is, does DPD, I know you might not know this answer, I'm just putting it out there as the context, does DPD count that against their police interactions? One, you probably don't have the answer right now for that, but that's one to look into. The second one is, my concern is, and I think one of the main officers in DPD security used to be a police officer in Colorado Springs, retired police officer, but do they have the training that is up to Denver standards? This is my concern, and beyond, to deal with our youth in a way, because they're using them as the heavy instead of the school. And then that escalates, and then they call DPD, and then that's escalating. Mm-hmm. And so I would really love to see a coordination. I know Padres Unidos, other organizations are working on this, and it's an issue dear to my heart because the kids that we work with tend to be the ones labeled the hardest, But at the same time, they're still kids to me. Right. And how do we, I like to see somehow in the future we could, talk about that more. And I know it's, you just came on, I don't know how much you're aware of that, but I think it's one of those issues that is really important because those are the interactions where you have this pseudo law enforcement in the middle. And that could really, by the time the officers are getting involved, it could already be escalated. So I'd like to see some work with that if we could, in the future. So
it's something that I am passionate about, and it's something that I do know a little bit about. It's something that is incorporated with the Bridging the Gap program as well. So our officers get training on top of just the forums that take place where they're learning their position as the gatekeeper to the school to prison pipeline. and officers are learning what RRI and DMC are and their role in that. So that's the Denver Police Department's position and extra training that they get. This is, again, an evidence-based model that GIA found out of Connecticut, evaluated by the University of Connecticut. So again, not just random stuff.
No,
of,
I
hey,
support
this
that
sounds-
part. I'm more
right.
worried about.
So that's the Denver Police Department's position. Now, there is a MOU that was assigned at North High School. Any other Vikings in the room, or am I the only one? Okay, no, there's two. Okay, 4 Vikings here. We can get back up in a minute, I promise. That was signed at North High School, and this is Padres Unidos, Denver Public Schools, and the Denver Police Department. Now, there is a separation that takes place when we want more incidences that are discipline referred to and handled by the school. Discipline is not criminal. And that's where things started to get out of whack across the country, when schools are using the police officers, the school resource officers, to handle their discipline. Discipline is not criminal, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen. So that IGA, signed by the chief of police, by the superintendent, and signed by Padres Unidos in the library of North High School, outlines exactly what takes place, who's responsible for what. So if it's a disciplinary matter, that's the school's responsibility. If it's a criminal matter, it's the police department's. And we're even moving towards other things as well. So there's a restorative justice that takes place at Lake Middle School, just a couple of blocks from where we are, and we're fully supportive of that. So discipline issues are DPSs, criminal issues are DPDs. So it is something that we look at, and then, Padres, similarly does an annual report as well that shows what schools are trending up and what schools are trending down.
Well, what I'm asking though is, with this, where they're utilizing DPS security and putting them in the middle, and then they're calling the police, you know what I mean? Like, it seems like, some of them are at their wits' end, because some of the schools contact other organizations to handle disciplinary issues they can't handle.
Right.
Which I agree with that part. I like that. But I'm more worried about the the DPS security.
Right.
And, I think, I know you guys have a role to play in that. I know that's not your responsibility, but, I think there has to be some dialogue around that.
Right.
In regarding that issue.
The only piece that I can say, again, a whole separate entity. What I can say is they don't have ticket writing or arrest authority. So at least when we're talking about some of those lower level incidences, lower level crimes that can then put a young person on a path that we don't want them to be on, that they don't have that authority to do that. So there's a little bit of that should be a little bit of solace, at least, that they can't write tickets. They weren't granted that authority in our city. So I hope that helps a little bit. I just can't speak for a different agency ultimately.
I just want to know, if we have a conversation with them, you guys will be at the table regarding these issues. That's the most important.
Yeah,
thing.
we do have regular conversations with that leadership team. We have to keep the school safe. We have to keep this school safe, and not only low-level incidences, but high-level incidences, as well as traffic around the school. So there are coordinated conversations that do take place. More of those individual ones would be just that. We would have to, if we have a specific incident where an individual didn't perform at the level that we expected them to be, whether it was the police officer or a member of the school staff, then we do have ongoing conversations about specific incidences, but not as a whole.
Okay.
Any other board member questions? Okay. Well, I think that at this point, we would like to give the audience members who are here in attendance and have been sitting and listening an opportunity to address the board or the police chief. There is a microphone there in the middle that we'll ask you all to cue in. But given the number of people, I'm going to have to ask that each person only spend no more than 2 minutes right, at the microphone, and certainly give Chief Pazen the opportunity to respond to your questions, and we'll do our best to try to get through them all. When you come to the mic, could you please tell us your name and then who you would like to address your question to?
Yes, hello. Is this on? Okay. Yes, hello, Miguel Ceballos. I am a board member of the Colorado Latino Forum. My question is concerning an incident that happened on November 8th of 2016, where Aurora police came into the Denver community of Mount Bello. They were in an unmarked F-150. None of the dash cams or the body cameras were on this incident. So I'm very proud of this new use of force. I think it's a good start. But my concern is being a resident of Northeast Denver and the proximity to Aurora. I really don't want Aurora police coming in, right? Because this board, the independent monitor, has no oversight over them, right? And so when Aurora police does come into our communities, this use of force policy doesn't apply to them. This is a loophole that I have identified before. I've talked to Mr. Commander Thomas about it at community meetings before. I want to know, in your view, what could be done to close this loophole?
So, and I know a little bit of the incident that you speak of, nothing in detail. And my understanding of this incident is that it essentially, and these are just legal or terms that we have used, fresh pursuit, that it was a continuing criminal episode that started in their jurisdiction. They didn't just come into Denver. They didn't just cross our boundaries and then try to initiate a traffic stop or a low-level type of work. There was some sort of high-level crime homicide that occurred in Aurora. So in those types of cases, when we're talking about the...
Well, Denver police was there on the scene first,
Right.
as I understand it, but Aurora police did roll up to the property. My concern about the whole story is that they were undercover. They had no insignia on the car. They had no sirens on. They
Right.
did not appear to be police officers. I would get scared if someone
Right.
rolled up to my house like that. So what I want to know is specifically is how can we prevent something like that happening again in Denver?
So, this is just a situation, again, that's based on the Colorado Post, meaning our officers are certified by the state of Colorado. If the situation were reversed and our officers were following up on a high-level investigation that occurred here in West Denver and then continued into Lakewood, the Denver Police Department would notify Lakewood as a courtesy, and they would then, do some follow-up. There are some handoffs that do take place. There are some.
Our use of force policy still applies to those police officers when they enter Lakewood, right?
So, absolutely, the Denver use of force policy would apply to Denver officers whether they engaged in any type of force issues in Denver or Aurora.
But it does not apply to Aurora police officers coming into
You're
Denver.
correct. Their policy would apply to them, and then, but there is some accountability here from the city of Denver, and then those cases are reviewed by the Denver District Attorney's Office. So when we are talking about a situation like that, the Denver DA's office would have jurisdiction over that, not the 17th or the 18th JD that covers North and South Aurora.
No, yeah, and Beth McCann did choose not to pursue any charges against the officers in that incident. Thank you.
Yes. So.
Thank you, Ms. Miguel.
Irene Rodriguez, The Nation Report. Back to your point about uniforms, I don't consider that a trivial issue because speaking as somebody who was beaten by the Denver police while doing my job on the street, I was not able to tell who did it because I couldn't. It would be nice to be able to read an officer's name.
Could you make sure that you're speaking into the microphone? And we can lower that for you. It's on the...
I don't know. Better? I don't know. Does the use of This is my first exposure to the new use of force policy. Can you tell me if you have, or the committee, have devised consequences for those officers who don't follow the use of force policy?
So, great question, and I'm really glad that you asked. Violations of the use of force policy would then be referred to the disciplinary matrix, right? So their internal affairs would review the case. This would be monitored by OIM. Then it goes to conduct review. Conduct review then sees where that fits within the disciplinary matrix. The disciplinary matrix was also something that was open and transparent. There were members of the community, members of the department and other city agencies that weighed in to say, okay, violation X equals this type of penalty. There's 7 different categories from very minor to termination that take place. So depending on the severity, the type, that's where it would fall within the matrix. And then again, the OIM has a representative in that conduct review meeting that takes place when they're discussing how and why, essentially the justification on this violation equals category A through F, why it fits that definition, and whether or not the situation is mitigated or is aggravated, or if it falls right in the middle, and then that's how the penalties are designed. And then again, when we're talking about transparency, those cases, whether the OIM agreed with them or disagreed with them, are all put into the annual report.
And if I have 15 more seconds, when there is an incident on the street, does the officer, you talked about sequestration, is the officer taken to an individual room, and who is the first point of contact after
So
that?
investigation, is that what, it just cut out just for a second.
Sequestration.
So depending on the incident, when we're talking about the highest levels of force, then that is exactly the case. On the lower levels, it's an overall investigation, and it's a comprehensive investigation that starts with witnesses. It starts with getting interviews from the people that were involved, putting all of that together, and then there are multiple levels of review all the way through with a level of transparency with annual reports as well. Okay. Wes.
Hi, my name is Wes Gary, and I have a comment and then a question for the Citizens Oversight Board.
Oh, good.
I'm a member of Together Colorado. It's about you, though, Chief. I'm a member of Together Colorado, a faith-based, nonpartisan group of community organizers, and I was on the police chief's use of force policy committee. And my comment is that the policy is a big improvement of what we had in the past. But a policy, of course, is just words, and there's going to be a lot of training and so forth. But what we want to see now at Together Colorado is we want to see measured results. We want to see numbers. In the past, there's been very little information put out by the police department about use of force. And so when I was on the committee, we came up with 6 or 7 questions, basic questions we would like to see the police department answer every year. And of course, that recommendation was rejected, but we don't give up. So my question now to the Citizens Oversight Board, because I believe that reporting and statistics is part of oversight. You know, having annual reports and coming back and reviewing your performance, that's oversight. So I would ask if the Citizens Oversight Board will support Together Colorado in asking the police department to commit to putting out annual, not we're thinking about it, we might do it, we're considering lots of things, commit to putting out annual reports, public reports about how the police department is using force each year. Now you have on your desk the 6 or 7 questions that I handed out that we wanted to get the police department to answer each year. Those are just examples. I'm sure there's lots more, but we would like a commitment rather than a we'll look at it kind of a response. So we would ask, Together Colorado is asking you to support us in requesting that the police department put out annual reports. I mean, you do have, done? All right, awesome. All right. All in favor, say aye.
Yeah.
I mean,
All right.
usually, sorry, go ahead. I mean, we tend to operate by, taking a consensus at our board meetings before we make a position
Sure.
as a group. But,
I understand.
Cisco can say he supports it, I can say I support it.
Well, would
Right.
you, can take it up at your next meeting, perhaps? All right, thank you very much.
And thank you for preparing this. We really
You bet.
appreciate it.
Wes, that was an easy question for them. I'm glad you asked them questions, but can you ask them some difficult questions?
Hi, I'm Lynn Thayer, and I just wanted to ask or clarify, is the old policy of broken windows gone, done, and dead? Or is this just, and the culture that goes with it in the department?
So the answer to the first question is yes, we do not engage in the broken windows policing philosophy. I think we outlined pretty good where we are today, where we're going in the near future, and where we're going in our long-term future. And you didn't hear broken windows in any of that. The second part, culture, that's something that we will continue to strive to get better. And I think by our example of putting such a diverse and inclusive executive leadership team is exactly setting that tone right from the top. And I'm proud of the team that we've put together. And we're a team that is focused on getting better every single day. And that's the type of culture that we are moving towards. We are newly appointed to these positions, but we're, the deputy chief hit a roll call last night. Ron, I don't think has slept in at least 5 weeks because he's been at every community meeting and roll call out there. So we're conveying the same message, the same use of force policy, the same PowerPoint, the same message that we're talking to you. I said it to, 90, 100 detectives today in the Art Dill Auditorium of this is where we are, this is where we're going, and this is how we're going to get there. The message didn't change. So when we're talking about building culture, we're out there day to day doing that. And I'm confident that we have a team that is focused on getting better every single day for the entire department. Thanks, Lynn.
Jesse Paris, Denver Homeless Out Loud, Black Star Action Movement for Self-Defense, and also City Council at Large candidate for 2019. I have several questions for the panel today. The first one would be, I was at a meeting back in, it was either June or July, where there was going to be a card that was going to be issued for any stops that were given. And during these stops, the race of the person that was stopped was going to be listed, the status of the person was going to be listed, and there was some more information on that card. Is that, has that been implemented yet? And also, Denver Homeless Out Loud, we are advocates against the urban camping ban. We're tired of the homeless blankets being taken. We're tired of the homeless being ticketed and harassed just for surviving on the streets of Denver. Is this panel looking into that? Stopping that? And also, we're tired of the permit patties, the barbecue Becky's, the widespread gentrification that's going on in our neighborhoods. We're is the panel looking into these 911 calls, these unnecessary 911 calls that are being issued on people of color? Thank you.
All right, I heard 3 questions. The first one is about data collection, the data collection program that the police department the pilot has initiated, if I'm correct, and I'll offer to let Chief Pazen give you the most up-to-date information. But essentially, the police department has initiated a pilot program in District 2. I believe it's District 2, right? With respect to that program and that process of trying to collect that data, and then the plan is to send that information to an organization, a national organization, to have them analyze it and actually see if there are disparities, et cetera, in the way that the police are interacting with the community. Is that about accurate?
You're exactly right. Okay. And then we're very fortunate. Division Chief Thomas is the one that's leading this project. So if you want, you could probably do your real short version. But,
Thank you very much.
We could talk extensively on this. It's really good, and I'm happy with where we're headed as well.
So as I was introduced, I am Division Chief Thomas over the Division of Patrol, and so you are correct, that program did start in District 2. We're about 5 weeks into a 2-month pilot, and the pilot is really just to fine-tune the instrument that we're using to collect this data. Once we get through with the pilot, we'll analyze that data that has been gathered, make sure that we're answering the questions that we want answered relative to, why do people get stopped and what happens to those people that get stopped. And then once we fine-tune the instrument that we're going to use, then we'll push that out citywide. So every officer that works in a district, traffic, the gang unit, they'll all be required to complete this card.
Thank you very much, Commander Tom. Actually, it's not Commander anymore. Division Chief, right?
Yes.
With respect to the homeless sweeps, the frank answer to your question is that's not an issue that's come before the board. The community hasn't engaged us on that, and frankly, we have been working on other issues that have come up with respect to oversight of law enforcement investigations of various pieces of misconduct. I acknowledge, though, that you as a community member are asking us to do that, and we can take that back and figure out a way to start to address it.
Well, I want to clarify, not in recent times, but we have talked about it on various occasions and have heard testimony from people coming to our meetings that we have on the first and the third Friday of every month. They came and shared their experiences with us. We looked into it, especially in District 6. So that is an ongoing issue on our radar. There's been several other issues. So that's what we've been, so we have dealt with it and we will continue to. Me, myself, I'm definitely opposed to it, and I definitely support, groups doing that. I mean, homelessness is a real serious issue in our community, and of course I support that. And as far as your other question about gentrifiers and the question about calling the police unnecessary, we've seen that all around the country, Oakland, other places, right? And so I know other community groups have talked about other places like in Chicago and other places. They've been having community meetings, inviting some of the gentrifiers to ask them questions like, why do you call the police? Like, what do you think a reason to call the police is for? And try to have a dialogue with them so when they see, young Mexican man, a young Chicano man, or whoever, and they're not, afraid of them, and say, how can they get those same needs met without calling the police? The police get many, many calls, and, things escalate and takes them out of the field from doing serious work, for calling for people. We've seen those ones that have went viral, but I know that from working in Cole and other neighborhoods where that just is a common thing. So I think part of that, I agree the police somehow should be a part of that, but the community needs to engage them and say, hey, share with us what your fears are and what's going on, and have a conversation from our side so they see people of color in the community holding them accountable. Not like going to this race thing or nothing like that, just more of like, I know you're new to these communities, but they have a history. Like, what you love about my community is what you're tearing down at the same time. So I think it's just having those frank discussions. I like to, afterwards maybe you could share your info with me and we could work on that at some point. It'd be good to have you there because you bring a perspective that other people might not have. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm also from Denver Homeless Out Loud, and I'll try not to repeat anything that he said. But the big issue that we've been facing is with the various sweeps that the police department have taken over the past year or two of homeless people. There's been a lot of taking of their possessions, including their IDs and things they care about a lot and things that are valuable to them, and throwing them away, losing them, not having any way of lining people up again with their own belongings or why they're being taken. And I wonder why that is necessary.
So, very, very difficult question to answer. We don't want to take anybody's ID when we are talking about these challenges. Sometimes don't even know how to answer that question. I guess there's a lot to it. When we're talking about what are termed sweeps, we don't set out for the day and say, okay, this is a homeless sweep day. That doesn't exist. If there are areas that have health issues, then oftentimes we'll partner with the health agencies to try to eradicate the problems that we're having in those particular areas. And when items are left without being able to connect them to who that person is, if that person isn't around, then that's how things sometimes are difficult. But those things are, it's a citywide comprehensive approach. The city will rent a warehouse, and those items are put together and then stored for, I believe, 90 days before anything happens to those. If we're talking about individual incidences where an officer asks somebody for ID, they hold onto the ID and then they forget to give it back to them, or they lose the ID, those are things that we do discipline officers for. But a lot to unpack there. There's no such thing as a sweep, even though it's been termed that. If there's an area that has rodent infestation, we have high levels of different types of disease that can be transmitted. Usually it's a health order that will come in, and it's a very comprehensive approach where folks that are contacted are given more than adequate time to remove their items. Items that don't have an individual to place them with are put together in packages, and then those are kept in a warehouse. The city will, and they try to rent out a warehouse that's within 1 mile, because they're talking about walking distance between. So this is a massive issue. It's not exclusive to the police department. If you want to, individual cases of people's property not being returned, like an ID or a wallet, those cases are referred to internal affairs. You can, report those cases to the Office of Independent Monitor. Those will be investigated. If they're found to be sustained, then the officers will be disciplined for that. So I hope I answered the question, but we're talking a massive issue. Sort of answer it? All right. Okay, progress. We'll take progress.
Good evening. My name is Joyce Miller. I'm a resident of Denver. My comments and questions are directed to the police chief. When I read this black and white version of the policy reform, they all say this policy not implemented until personnel training is completed. So does that mean it will not go into effect until 2019, January, or when?
So in the PowerPoint, you see how we are doing the phased-in training process. When you're talking about training 1,500 officers, it's not just the patrol division, because there's also officers or detectives that could be engaged in the same type of activity. So as soon as we have the officers fully trained and we are ready to implement the policy, then that's exactly what we're doing, and we're working towards that as quickly as possible. It's a phased-in approach in order to get there.
So you said the end of this year you wanted to have.
We will have all 1,500 officers, investigators, supervisors trained by the end of the year.
Okay, so another thing, you made a comment about body cams. The body cameras, when nationwide they were talking about having body cameras.
Right.
My objection was that if officers had control to turn them off and on, then what was the use of spending the money to buy body cams? So
Right.
in Denver, are the officers equipped with the ability to turn the cameras on and off, or?
You're correct.
And
And
so,
then there's a very strong policy with regards to body cams as well. So if you have officers that are turning them off when there's items that they don't want captured on them, then they'll be disciplined for that as well.
Is that included in the policy?
Well, it's a separate, it is available online. It's, we don't hide any of our policies.
Okay.
So it's just a separate policy, similar to the uniform is a separate policy. The chase policy is separate, even though at the end of a chase policy, there may be use of force, or at the end of a chase policy, there may be a need to make sure that the body cam is on prior to, leading up, during the chase. They're separate policies to address the separate issues, but you can see each and every one of them. Our policy manual is about 700, it's close to 700 pages, so it's quite extensive, and that's something that our officers need to know. So when we're talking about input from the community, there's a lot in there, and it is very transparent. It's open. You can pull it up on any smartphone. You can pull it up any internet connection at home, library, wherever you need.
Okay, and you talked about your vision for the police department. Are the officers aware of your complete vision for
Yes. So we talked about that just a little bit. They're in the Art Dill Auditorium today at 10 o'clock. I spoke to all of the investigators and supervisors from the Major Crimes Division, as well as officers and supervisors from the Investigative Support Division. And everything that I told you about the what's, the whys, the hows, our domestic violence, all of that, they heard the exact same thing. And I've been to every single district that we've had. I've been to the gang unit. I've been to Metro SWAT, and then more importantly, our team is re-emphasizing that. Ron, I don't know how many roll calls they've gone to, but I know it's a lot. And Barb was just at District 2 roll call last night after a long community meeting that we had. Instead of going home, she went and hit the roll call. So yes, we are doing that. And then it's not a short-term commitment. I can tell you that our team is committed to doing these monthly. The same thing that we that I said at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, because I talked for a while, was that this isn't it's not the first, it may be the first time, but it's not the last time that we'll be having these ongoing conversations. But we want feedback from the officers as well, right? They're the ones that are doing the job. We want to make sure that we are accessible and that it's a two-way communication, that we're communicating and sharing our vision, establishing that culture, but we're also have the feedback loop on what's working, what's not working, what ideas and innovations that they have, so we can, again, do a better job in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams.
Good evening. My name is Nicole Sparikas, and I have two comments. First of all, to me, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay.
Yes,
thank you.
Nicole.
To me, the dichotomy between a disciplinary matter and a criminal matter is not always as clear-cut as you sort of suggested when you kind of did this, right? And a lot of times a disciplinary matter it has to do with a very troubled kid who 2 weeks later may do something criminal. So, I realize it's kind of a DPS problem in terms of dealing with the original disciplinary issue, but people should be aware that depending on who the kid is, how troubled they are, and what have you, that they may be at risk for, transitioning into some more criminal kind of behavior, okay? The second thing I want to point out is the need for aggressive evaluation of your policies. Most people wouldn't be critical of finding out that a policy worked well 2 years later, but they may be critical finding out 2 years later that a policy wasn't working. And therefore, I think it's important to have kind of a rolling evaluation component so that you can spot trends in policies that aren't effective and aren't working sooner rather than later. And that's just two comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I will ask that you make sure you speak into the microphone as much as you possibly can. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Eva Hutt. I'm also with Together Colorado. I want to comment that that the use of force policy shows in the way it improved over what was put out 18 months ago, what it means to have good community input, and very optimistic about that. Also want to reiterate that it's incredibly important. You've heard it before, and really I don't understand why there isn't a clear commitment from you, sir, to report some basic statistics now and report them again in a public way to the community so that we can all track this and work together. There are a couple other things I want to say about gaps in the policy. One has to do with the decision not to require reporting of unleashing a holster. I don't know about you, but if somebody pulls out a gun on me, that I've been forced. And the second thing is, I think as the policy is a living document and changes and grows during your tenure, that we really need to address the importance of not using force against people who are being verbally abusive. And I know verbal abuse is hard to take, but it's no reason to wave a nightstick or pull a gun. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ava.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? So my name is Kamal Allen. I'm also with Together Colorado. I'm an organizer with Together Colorado. And I have two questions. One is relating to officers who have disciplinary issues, as well as the implementation of this use of force policy. The first question is, would an officer who has already been in violation of the use of force policy, either in the past or in another department, who was hired by DPD, who is then found in violation of this use of force policy, be handled any differently than an officer who violates it for the first time?
So a new officer, so a lateral essentially, right? Somebody that's worked in a previous department, and if they have a violation of a use of force policy in the past, and then you want to know if that would be, so the way that the disciplinary matrix works is that would be the first violation in Denver would be their first violation, whether they were a lateral hire or a new entry hire.
Okay, thank you. And my second question, which is related to a meeting that you've had with Together Colorado, which I think would be valuable information to our community partners here, is how can community partners continue providing input and resources and relationship and collaboration when it comes to implementing this use of force policy?
Well, we made progress, whether we made that initially or stumbled into it, and I think we stumbled into it later, and I think proof is in the pudding here that regardless how we got to the community input, once we did have community input, that it's a policy that is much stronger and much more progressive than had we as a police department tried to do it by ourselves. That lesson is not lost. We're not going to sit here and then as we move towards future endeavors, not, try to do the exact same thing. You learn from those lessons, and that's what we've been talking about, doing better as we move forward. Yes, the three of us sat down, or the four of us, the five of us. I told you I went to North, right? The county might not be the best here. We sat down and we talked. And we talked about a report that would catalog and be transparent on where we are with those. We are working towards those, but we also talked about today's the first day of training, right? So how can we report out on something that the very first, I definitely can't train, well, I could have, right? I talked about how we could have hit the easy button. We could have hit the easy button and said the final report is the final use of force policy. I'm sorry, the final policy is the final use of force policy. And I don't think that would have done anybody any good. We We could have done that. We could have said the July 5th presentation of the final use of force policy was it, and said that is a done deal. And we could have just hit the email send and said, all 1,500 officers, all of this, you need to know and understand and digest it. And when we're talking about physical force being used on or by officers and or community members, figure it out. But we didn't do that. We together have this heavy lift of finding common ground, and that's our philosophy, that's our culture, that's what we're doing moving forward. So we need some time to get the policy trained. We need a little bit of time. That way we can effectively evaluate it, find out what is working and what's not working. And I said it to the committee that you have our commitment that we are going to evaluate this and come together and work towards either strengthening the policy or saying, yeah, it's working as planned. We have a year's worth of review. Let's meet again in 6 months. Let's meet again in 12 months and see if it's still working after then. Because, again, what might make sense today, it may be completely different in 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, and you have our commitment that we are willing to come to the table and evaluate this. We're not saying that this thing is done and we're never going to change it. This is one of, if not the most critical policies in that entire 700-page manual, and we will evaluate it and ask for community input a year after implementation.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if I've communicated effectively exactly what I was trying to ask. I guess I was asking, are there points in the process of training and implementation where community members can get involved in support? Is what I'm asking.
Thank you for clarifying it. And I think this goes back to that Virtua 300. We do want to open up the doors. Where we are right now with the lecture base and the 8-hour training, I think the most appropriate part or the best input that we could have is the same thing that some of the board members had the opportunity to do. And we would open that up to you, Together Colorado, the other groups that worked really hard. Anybody that's interested to take a look at it, and as we build and develop those scenario-based situations that you can see for yourself if those things are training out our policy the way that they were designed.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. So in the interest of time, I think that we can only take a couple more questions. I see a few people queued up, but just so we can get people out of here as close to 8 as possible.
Hi, my name is Michelle Sepulveda. I'm an educator at Colorado High School, GES. We are a charter school. My question for you is, because I know that there are programs like Bridging the Gap between kids and cops. I am a recent trained facilitator for that. But when I think about working with my youth who have experienced many different levels of trauma and have a lot of negativity towards cops in general, I want to know what kind of training is in this use of force policy that is geared towards youth.
So, the policy is based on the application, and I mean, I guess there's a very small reference on some of the tools or devices, but that's not the purpose of this policy. If we're talking about trauma-informed practices, implicit bias, some of those issues that have an impact, that's we don't have that in policy. That's not part of this. We do provide training. We have 268 officers that have gone through that effective interactions with youth, and we are expanding that moving forward. So that's how we're addressing, again, a few years ago, you would be hard-pressed to find any agency or any police officers that are learning these same types of challenges that our community has: adolescent brain development, the trauma-informed practices, and the implicit bias. Our officers are getting that. They're getting trained in those areas, and then they're participating in those forums. So kudos to you for being a facilitator. Have you hosted any of the forums yet?
Not yet, but just going after or experiencing that and thinking like the mistrust that my students have. It just makes me think like once this use of force policy, once police officers are being trained and they're able to see it, I believe that Bridging the Gap can be a more effective program. It's just like at this point, I invited my students to come. I had one student that decided to come, but the other ones were just like, they gave me questions. Most of it was based on training and how they're going to be treated. I did have one female student last year on an RTD incident where the handcuffs up, bruises on their arms, and there was like bruises, and like she had to walk with a limp, and it was just because she was trying to calm her friend who was like reacting towards the cops. So when I hear stories about a student getting like the broken window thing not supposed to be happening, and hearing it that it happened and they get tased in the face, yeah, like they are kids, they might exaggerate or whatever, but when you see the scars and things, it just makes you question things that much more.
Well, thanks for facilitating. I think it would be great to talk to Gia and try to get a forum set up for your school. Have you done that yet?
No, not yet.
Okay.
I did. I wanted to do something with Lyric. I'm just waiting for them to email me back so we can schedule a date.
These are very impactful, and when you talk about the small group work that is done, there's a lots of lessons learned that take place, lots of light bulb moments for not only the officers but also the young people that are involved. So this is just one component of that, but it is one piece of a broader. It's not. We're not saying that this is the be all end all for us, that we're doing this and that has the and is part of the Community Culture Academy that we do, and that's when the officers graduate from not the police academy itself, but from the field training program, so that way officers can learn firsthand from the communities that they do serve some of those historical conflicts that have taken place between the officers and the communities that they serve. Again, another component to breaking that down. We talk about all officers getting the 40 hours of CIT. So there's many different components in order to address that, but part of CIT also involves that adolescent brain development, the youth decision making, and all of those pieces. So it's all separate components that fit towards this bigger picture to establish that culture of trying to essentially de-escalate those situations, reduce the number of negative impacts or negative interactions that take place.
Thank you, Michelle. I think if you don't know about the Bridging the Gap program, I encourage you to, Chief Pazen is right, it's really an excellent program. I'd love to see it expanded. Again, in the interest of time,
Yes,
keep your comments.
this is actually,
Thank
my
you.
name is Rebecca Henderson. I do work at the library. This isn't a question I think that you can actually answer, but it's something that I'd like you guys to maybe go home and think about and chew on, if that's okay. This whole idea of use of force. Why are we using the force in the first place? What is inspiring? You're using these terms like fear of crime. What I hear is fear of Black and brown people. That's what I hear, okay? So I'm sorry, I don't want to be emotional. My cousin was killed by the police, okay, years ago. So there's a lot going on there, but it's like, how are we going to address these real issues that are really at the root of it, which is white supremacy and internalized dominance and a myth of Black inferiority and brown inferiority? And I just want you to think about it.
Aubrey Lavazo. I am on Chief White's and Chief Pazen's Community Advisory Board. I'm a member. Full disclosure, I've known Chief Pazen now for 4 years and worked with him closely. And while I do appreciate some of the things that have been brought up, some of the issues, I think it's also important to emphasize the good things that happen in this community. And a couple of years ago, I did a ride-along in Commander Pazen's District 1. And regarding the homeless situation, our first call out, and I think it came from Chief White, was that there was a homeless man that lived in an encampment up on the Platte River in Globeville and had supposedly been injured. Well, the call came down for us to go find that homeless person and get him help. We spent, and I was there, I spent over an hour. In the end, there were 4 cars looking for one homeless person. We were supposed to get him help. Turns out he was okay. I met him, he was okay. Second instance I want to tell you about, someone asked, I think Dr. Brown, is it, or Mr. Brown? Mark Brown? Yes. Yeah, the thing about youth engagement. Again, knowing Chief Pazen now, he may not have told you, I know very well because I've worked with him for so long, is a program that he created in Sun Valley working with youth. And he didn't talk about that, and I know we don't have time to talk about that now, but he created a program that provided exposure to young people in Sun Valley where they got exposure to city council, the judicial system, and he got them jobs, working in a community. That was Chief Pazen. Personally, I've worked with him with at-risk boys at Greenlee Elementary School. Most of these boys were of color, of course. In 5th grade boys, in one program, and it's a program that he himself initiated, and just this past April, worked with him again with 4th grade boys, at-risk boys, on a community engagement project. He brought them into his office, into the conference room, and sat down and answered their questions honestly. And at the end of that discussion, these boys, and they were all people of color, boys of color, she changed their minds about the police department. So I think we need to hear the good stories too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm clapping for that one.
Thank you. No, I agree. There are a lot of very good people, hardworking people, the police department, the sheriff's department, Department of Safety, and it's the discussions are about trying to get things right when they go wrong, and there's no question that there's a sense that it goes wrong more often with individuals and communities, the African American community, Latino community, is my observation. Want to thank everyone for being here. I think it's time to wrap up this meeting. I want to first thank our guest, Chief Pazen, for sitting in the hot seat for a bit, but also, being very candid in your answers. Thank you very much. And also for your team that has come forward and taken the time to come here and join us as well. Thank you very much. Very quickly, these meetings really are very helpful for us, but also we think they're helpful for the community. We take this information, we process it, we try to come up with ways that we can react to it. Because we have the meetings on a regular basis with the safety department personnel, these are issues that we'll bring up with them. I do want to share that at our last public forum, we collected information and feedback from the community regarding some issues with the department, the sheriff's department here in Denver, as well as comments regarding oversight in general. And those pieces of information, that feedback we got from the community, just so you know, are on posters here around the room. So if you have the time before you leave, please take a look. And if there's anything you want to add, please write on the board. We always want to be hearing from the community. We certainly have information from you tonight that we will take back, and we'll continue to try to work with the Department of Safety as well as the police chief to move things in the positive direction, collaborating the way that we think is positive for this community. With that, I want to thank the members from the Office of the Independent Monitor who helped put this forum together, particularly Gia Irlando. And finally, I want to thank Channel 8. Channel 8's been a partner with us for many, many years, and we appreciate you being here so that this forum can get broadcasted out to a larger swath of the community. On that, I'd like to say thank you again, and good evening. Thank you.